I think I'm recording. Just want to make sure. In the abstract, it's not a bad idea. It's a good idea. I mean, to some extent, you have to trade economic. I mean, I have a degree in economics. To some extent, you have to trade, right? That's the whole idea behind the United States. People say it as one word, but the reality is it's two separate words. We united these states. They trade with one another. We don't have barriers. We don't have tariffs with each other. You want to go sell something this morning in Ohio or in Louisiana or in Maine, you just do it, and you can drive there, you can be there later and just sell stuff. You don't pay special, well, you do pay state taxes, but you know what I mean. It's one country. It's one set of tax laws. So, and that was the idea behind the European Union, to create one contiguous set of countries within a sort of a kind of global boundary where they would trade and negotiate trade tariffs together. So yeah, you do want to trade with other countries. It makes things more efficient. It's the law of comparative advantage. It's why we drive cars today, right? I mean, when you think about it, how did we go from horses to automobiles? I mean, the automobile was not invented by Henry Ford. It was invented by somebody way before that. But the problem there is, how do I get horses were plentiful? There were horses all over the country, went back to the Native Americans. So the horses everyone had access to. But when we making this to make this transition to automobiles, which was obviously a much better mode of travel, you have to mass produce these things. And it was Henry Ford who understood economics and understood the law of comparative advantage, and he created the assembly line. So right there and then, you see how it's essentially the assembly line is trade theory. Rather than have three or four people put a car together, everybody gets good at one part. I always say in economics that the way I explain the benefits to trade is, if three people are living, let's say three people are colleagues, not they're living together, they're not family members, but they're three people who are sharing a space, a house, an apartment, whatever. Three colleagues, right? Three professionals. And every morning they eat breakfast. Every morning they have coffee, juice, yogurt, eggs, blah, blah, blah. And they all need to use the kitchen the same time. They all get ready and they all want to eat at the same time. They want to get going. And of course, if you ever been in a situation like that, I mean, I was always like in my parents' house, or I live with my wife. But if you ever been in a situation, it's got to be frustrating. You're waiting now to use the coffee maker. You're waiting to fry your eggs or whatever you want to eat in the morning. Now, if those three people sit down and say, listen, instead of getting in each other's way, how about one person makes the toast and gets the yogurt and fruit. One person handles the omelets or the eggs, and one person handles the coffee and the juice and everything else. Well, you know what? Not only does it become very efficient, it gets better, because now the people who specialize could be better at that. So a person who makes the eggs every day might start thinking about making different omelets, or playing around with it, or using a different method, or they're focused on this one thing. And the person with the yogurt or the juice, they're focused on the same thing every day, so they're going to be better at doing those things. So therefore, trade works. Everyone does what they're good at and trades one another. The argument that the Republican administration is making now is that we need to bring jobs back to the Midwest, and that was really one of the main points behind the campaign promises, was this whole idea of making America great again, whether you agree with it or not. And I'm not in love with, some parts of it. I still believe you need borders, but you're worried that you don't want to demonize people. But let's put that aside. That's politics. But the bottom line is, what it really means is to bring jobs back to the country. And part of that is, how do we do that and still maintain trade relations, which you have to with your allies? I mean, for a variety of reasons, not just trade, but to keep the dollar and other currency relationships in balance, to keep the dollar as the reserve currency. All these things are important. And when we talk about international business, how do you balance the two? So I think the whole idea that this has been introduced is a shock to the system, and there's no question that the system is going to have to deal with that. And that's what we're seeing now in the markets. The system is trying to adjust to that. So I give that as a preamble, because when we're looking at what determines currency values, and this is what you're going to put in for this week's IP, and you guys did great last week. The first thing you want to look at is, and this is like really an interesting time to be teaching this, because we're living in a probably in a 1 in 50 year or 1 in 100 year cycle of, we haven't seen this type of protectionism in a long time. Well, you want to look at macroeconomic factors like interest rates. We've seen now, because the Chinese are retaliating, they're dumping treasuries, and therefore they're raising interest rates. And that's going to affect your currency, because if you looked at the dollar euro relationship, it's gone from about $1.05 to $1.14. That's a dramatic move. So definitely when you're investing in another country, you're going to want to look at that. Now that helps if you were a US business that located in Europe, not such a bad thing for you now, because now your euro earns is more valuable. On the same time, you want to look at trade balances, and this is a major issue, and economic stability, because these are going to be two issues that are going to be front and center for the foreseeable future as this trade issue starts to wind itself through the economy. Okay, so macroeconomic factors are important, and I know the two. I greatly, and I want to say that I greatly appreciate that the two of you are here. I know that you had to take time out of your day, or maybe you're working or whatever. I really do appreciate that. But so I urge you to ask me questions if you have any questions. If you don't have questions and you want to ask me later, you say, I was working, Professor, but I want to ask about this. Just send me a message, But at any rate, let me keep going and just use this as guidance, okay? So that's one of the main things you want to hit on, and give me some color on that. You can absolutely talk about what's going on in the current economy right now. There's no reason not to. It's up to you, but there's no reason not to do that. Socio-political factors, okay? Political events, okay? Government stability. Now, where does that come into play? Well, we know that the dollar did get strong for a while. And why did it get strong? Well, dollar euro, because you had all these issues in the Ukraine. I mean, it's a devastating war. The Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. It's definitely hasn't been a small skirmish. Many people have died. And these kind of political factors are scary, because if people are going to invest in Europe, they want to know that Europe is safe, that they're not going to have to worry about a wartime problem, right? We know World War II was an awful war, right? So the socio-political factors definitely come into effect. And in the short term, we're dealing with things like the Ukraine. We're dealing with things like the Suez Canal, where you have those Houthis that are trying to block it, or they commandeer ships. You have issues in the Middle East, which is right there. So these are socio-political factors, and there are a lot of kind of minor factors that you will see in these areas, things that you don't read about every day, but they're happening. Those are okay, because it's no different than anywhere else. Those we could live with, but the bigger ones become more concerning. So therefore, you're going to want to talk about that a little bit, how that will affect your business. That affects your currency values. Because if people are really afraid about a country, they're going to sell the currency, and they're going to affect your business. And also, you're running a business there, so you have to worry about that, right? If you're affected by the Ukrainian war, but depending on where you're locating your business, it could be an issue, right? Then you got the more fundamental factors like the interest rates. So interest rates might be higher in one country as another. Inflation adjusted interest rates. Always remember that. It's not just interest rates, it's inflation adjusted interest rates. So when we talk about inflation adjusted interest rates, what we're really talking about is maybe like country A is paying 5% and country B is paying 3%. So you would automatically assume that country A has a better is better for your currency if you were just an investor in currencies. So, well, I'm going to put it in country A because I can earn 5% while I wait, as opposed to 3 in country B. But then you got to look at inflation. If the purchasing power, and that's what the next thing is, if inflation equals purchasing power. If inflation or the prices of goods are running 5% a year in the 5% country, well, really, you're not earning anything because everything costs 5% more. If in country B, inflation is only running at 1%, you're actually doing better because you're picking up an additional 2%. So when you talk about interest rates and purchasing power parity, make sure that you talk about the effect of pricing and interest rates. So inflation can absolutely hurt a currency. Then there are more speculative factors. So then you're going to get the professional trading community that are going to look at all of these things, make decisions, and change the value of currencies based on their prognostication of these decisions. They're going to look at these things and they're going to say, well, let's see if, let's try to predict in the future where these currencies are going. And if we could do that, then you know what? We can bet on these things. And hedge funds do this to a large extent. Hedge funds will do this, mostly hedge funds. There is something called macro hedge funds. And these macro hedge funds will bet on these things, okay? They'll bet on these things. They'll make bets based on where they believe currencies are going. That's happening right now. The markets have gyrated, and there's a reason why the markets have gyrated, because what they're doing is they're trying to look at where the markets are headed and trying to profit from that. So use examples, always helpful to use examples. You could use examples like, if Coca-Cola is doing business now in Europe and the euro is getting stronger and they're earning euros because people are paying for the Coca-Cola in euros. Well, now that the euro is getting stronger, they can translate back into the US at better prices. That would be an example. All right. But things get more expensive for us now, right? Because if we need more dollars to buy euros, it's more expensive to buy foreign goods. And that's all part of this tariff issue. Okay. So that's part one. And the other thing we want to talk about is the discussion guidance. So you want to look at current, what is an impact on a multinational company when currencies move like this? Again, we just went over it. You want to look at their costs, right? They got to pay for it in the foreign currency. The revenues translate differently, hedging costs. So a U.S. company selling products in Europe are going to earn their revenues in euros. If the euro weakens, then they're going to need more dollar. They're going to need more euros. It weakens their, it reduces their profits. Right now, with the dollar stronger, with the euro stronger, it's actually helping those companies. Okay. They also want to think about access to capital, interest rate risks, all the things that multinationals face when doing business in another country. And ultimately, you want to wrap it up with foreign taxes and regulation risk. What kind of regulations are going on in these countries? And now, one of the issues and again, you don't have to put this in, but it's interesting. One of the issues that comes up now when you look at doing business overseas is going to be not just the tariffs. See, if you really are, and I beg you always to read the papers. This is why, because you see that tariffs are just like part of the issue. Tariffs are not the entire issue. Tariffs are just part of the issue. The real issue, or the main issues besides tariffs, are what they call non-tariff barriers. And what non-tariff barriers are different rules that are being imposed by countries that affect trade, but they're not necessarily directly related to tariffs. So, for instance, in some countries, they may ban certain products, they may put additional taxes on certain products that we would sell to them, but they say, well, there's a health issue or there's a regulation, or, we need to regulate that industry. Now, while that's not a direct tariff or a quota, it clearly affects how much you can trade with those countries. So therefore, that becomes an issue. And that's one of the issues that is happening right now. When we talk about trade problems now, when we're in the middle of a trade war, it's not just the tariffs. It's going to be non-tariff barriers. It's going to be things like additional taxes put on certain goods. I know I read somewhere that when you sell, and this is as an example the politicians are using, is if you want to sell like Louisiana rice, right? Rice that's grown in Louisiana, and you want to sell it to an Asian country, I forget if it was China or Vietnam, they're going to impose a 5% a 700% tax on overseas rice. Now, obviously, these countries eat a lot of rice. It's a staple of their diet. So you want to sell rice to them, but it's not the tariff that stops you. It's the 700% specific cost of selling different type of rice there. Now, why they do that, I'm not, I'm not a trade representative. I'm sure they'd give you a reason for it, and I'm sure we'd give you a reason for not doing it. But at the end of the day, that's a big cost to businesses. So it's not just the tariffs you have to deal with on a regulatory basis. You've got to deal with the legal structure. You've got to deal with specific rules and legalities and that sort of thing. So that's basically it. I mean, that's what you need to do for this week's IP and discussion. And if you just follow my guidance, add a little, subtract a little, meet the word count. That's really important. I don't want to have to I hate taking off points for lack of meeting the word count. So always make sure you meet the word count, because at the end of the day, I have to deal with that. That's something the school, you got to remember something. And I try to explain this to students. You have to meet accreditation, right? You want your school to meet accreditation. You want that when you walk out with this degree, people recognize it as an accredited degree from an independent accreditation. Well, in order to get that, the school has to show that the assessments or the tests or the quizzes or whatever you have to take are consistent with what would be accredited. And one of those things is, since we give you a lot of individual projects and we want to have a word count. So when an independent auditor looks at it, they can say, okay, they didn't just give them an answer, they gave it to them and they had to use so many words, and at least that proves that you have to give enough information that would be consistent with a college degree. So just be aware of that. Just get it done, okay? But that's basically it. Any questions? Okay, and Carla, we might have done some stuff on the IP before. Good morning. Just watch the video again. It's not that much, but you have the guidance. I just explained it. Really gave more of a political look, but that's it. But if you don't have any, I'll stay here for a minute. If you don't have any more questions, I know a few of you might be at work or you got other things going on. I'm here. If you want to go, please go. Have a great weekend. If you celebrate or if you worship, have a blessed Palm Sunday. If you're Jewish, Passover, and you guys know. Okay.
Come on. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you for coming, actually.